I always thought I had the perfect marriage. My wife Lindsay and I had been together for 7 years, and while we had our ups and downs, I never doubted her loyalty. Until one day everything changed. It started with something small, a random pop up on my computer while she was using it. She quickly closed it, brushing it off as some junk ad. I didn't think much of it at first, but the uneasy feeling in my gut lingered. A couple of weeks later, I came home early from work, hoping to surprise her, but instead, I ended up being the one surprised. As I walked into our living room, I heard the faint sound of moaning coming from our bedroom. I froze, heart pounding in my chest. Was she cheating on me? I rushed upstairs, dreading what I might find. The door was slightly ajar, and there she was, sitting in front of her laptop. But there was no man, no lover in our bed. She was alone, but what I saw on her screen made my stomach drop. She was streaming on a tricatum site. At first, I couldn't process it. I stood there, silently watching as she laughed and flirted with strangers on the internet, completely unaware of my presence. The chat window on the side of the screen was flooded with comments, disgusting, explicit things, and she responded to them all with a smile. My Lindsay, my wife, doing this. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. My legs felt like they were cemented to the floor. All those late night work calls and early morning yoga sessions suddenly made sense. She wasn't cheating on me in the traditional sense. Number. This was something different, something worse. She was exposing herself, our life, to thousands of strangers, and I was the fool who never noticed. When she finally saw me standing there, her face went pale. She quickly slammed the laptop shut, but it was too late. I had seen everything. "Mike, I can explain," she stammered, rushing toward me, but I couldn't hear her. I couldn't even look at her. My mind was spinning, racing to make sense of what I had just witnessed. Was this why she had been so distant lately? So preoccupied? "How long?" I finally managed to choke out. "Please, just let me explain," she begged, her voice trembling. "How long?" I demanded, my voice louder this time. Tears welled up in her eyes, and she whispered, 6 months. 6 months. For half a year, the woman I loved, the woman I trusted more than anyone in the world, had been doing this behind my back. The betrayal was crushing. It wasn't just the act itself. It was the lies, the secrecy, the double life she had been living. While I was working late, busting my ass to provide for us, she was performing for strangers online. I stormed out of the room, barely able to control the rage and humiliation boiling inside me. She followed, begging me to stay, to listen, but I couldn't. I grabbed my keys and left, driving aimlessly for hours, trying to wrap my head around everything. The worst part wasn't even the streaming itself. It was realizing that, in some twisted way, I had been completely cut out of her life. I wasn't enough for her anymore, and she had found a new source of validation. Strangers online, faceless men who only cared about what she could offer them in those fleeting, virtual moments. Over the next few days, we barely spoke. She tried to explain that it was just a way to make extra money or a thrill, something that didn't mean anything. But it meant everything to me. It meant the destruction of the trust we had built. It meant the unraveling of the life I thought we shared. I don't know where we go from here. I don't know if I can ever look at her the same way again. All I know is that my life, my marriage, will never be the same. The days after discovering Lindsay's secret were a blur. I couldn't think straight, couldn't focus on anything but the image of her in front of that screen, performing for God knows how many strangers. I hadn't stayed in the house since the night I found out. I couldn't stand to be near her. Instead, I crashed at my buddy Sam's place, but even that felt wrong. How could I explain what was happening without sounding like a fool? We had a child together, our 4-year-old daughter, Emma. She was the light of my life, and the one thing that kept me grounded during all this. Every time I thought about leaving Lindsay, I thought about Emma. What would this do to her? How would she understand? It was on the 4th night after getting Emma from daycare that I had to go back to the house. She had been asking about Mommy for days, and no matter how angry or hurt I was, I couldn't keep them apart. Lindsay had been texting me nonstop since I left, begging me to talk, saying she was sorry, that it wasn't what I thought. But what was it then? I pulled up to the house, Emma chattering in the back seat, oblivious to the storm brewing between her parents. Her excitement about seeing Lindsay tugged at something inside me, a mix of guilt and bitterness. I unlocked the door and walked in, Emma rushing ahead of me, shouting, "Mommy!" Lindsay was in the living room, curled up on the couch, her face puffy and red from crying. When she saw Emma, her expression brightened, and for a second it was like nothing had happened. She scooped Emma up, hugging her tight. The sight of them together twisted the knife deeper. I couldn't take it. "I'll be upstairs," I muttered, barely able to look at her. "Mike, please," she called after me, but I was already halfway up the stairs. I needed space, time to think. I could hear them talking downstairs, Emma giggling as if everything was perfectly normal. I shut the bedroom door behind me and sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the floor. What was I supposed to do now? I could pretend for Emma's sake, but what about me? What about the damage this had done to our marriage? I didn't know how long I sat there before I heard the door creak open. Lindsay stepped inside, closing it softly behind her. She stood there, eyes red and tired, waiting for me to say something. But I didn't. I couldn't find the words. "Mike, we need to talk," she whispered, sitting down on the bed next to me. "There's nothing to talk about," I said, my voice flat. "You lied to me. For 6 months, you lied. It's not like that? Then what is it, Lindsay? What the hell is it like? Because from where I'm standing, you've been parading yourself in front of strangers for money, for attention, or I don't even know what." My voice was shaking now, my hands clenched into fists at my sides. She looked down, biting her lip, trying to hold back the tears. "I'm sorry, I was stupid, okay? It started as just something to make extra cash. With everything getting so expensive, I thought I could help out, but it got out of hand." "That's your excuse? Money? I've been busting my ass to provide for this family, and you think streaming on some disgusting site is the solution?" Her face twisted in pain. "It wasn't just about the money. I felt invisible, Mike. After Emma was born, everything changed. You were always working, always tired, and I don't know, I was lonely." "Lonely?" I shot up from the bed, pacing the room. "And instead of talking to me, you go online and what? Flash strangers for compliments? Do you know how insane that sounds? How humiliating?" "I know," she cried, standing up, her voice breaking. "I know I messed up. I wasn't thinking. I didn't realize how far it had gone until you found out. But it wasn't like I was cheating." I stopped dead in my tracks, turning to face her. "How is it not cheating, Lindsay? You exposed yourself to people, men, for months without telling me. How do you think I'm supposed to feel?" She didn't answer, just looked at me, tears streaming down her face. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The weight of it all, the betrayal, the lies, it was suffocating. "I can't fix this, Mike," she whispered finally, her voice so small. "But I'm begging you, please don't walk away, not for me, for Emma. She needs us." Emma. My heart ached at the thought of her. So innocent in all this. She didn't deserve to be caught in the middle of her parents' mess. But what kind of example would I be setting if I stayed? How could I look her in the eyes, knowing the kind of person her mother had become? "I don't know what to do," I admitted, my voice cracking. "I can't just pretend this didn't happen." "I'll stop," she said quickly, desperation in her eyes. "I'll delete the account. I'll never do it again. Just, please, Mike, don't give up on us." I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that things could go back to the way they were before all of this. But deep down, I knew it wasn't that simple. The trust had been shattered, and no matter how much I wanted to protect Emma from the fallout, I couldn't lie to myself. "I need time," I said quietly, my heart heavy with uncertainty. Lindsay nodded, wiping her tears. "I'll do whatever it takes." But as I walked out of the room that night, I wasn't sure if anything could ever be the same again. The weeks after our conversation were hard. I'd moved back into the house, mostly for Emma's sake. But things between Lindsay and me were tense. We barely spoke, avoiding each other as much as possible. At night, I slept on the couch, trying to give Emma the illusion that everything was normal, but it wasn't. Not even close. Lindsay kept her word. She deleted the streaming account, or at least she said she did. I wasn't sure I could trust her anymore. Every time she picked up her phone or spent too long on the computer, that uneasy feeling returned, gnawing at my gut. I was always wondering what she was really doing, who she was talking to. Then, one afternoon, everything fell apart for good. I had finished work early, feeling like I needed some time to clear my head, so I decided to pick Emma up from school and take her to the park. It was a simple plan, one of the few things that still brought me joy. Being with Emma, watching her smile, made me forget, at least for a little while, about everything wrong in my life. As I pulled into the parking lot at Emma's school, I noticed something strange. My car, our car, the one Lindsay had been using that day, was parked in a secluded corner of the lot, far from the school entrance. My heart started racing immediately, but I tried to calm myself. Maybe she was running an errand. Maybe I was overreacting. But then I saw it. A man was in the passenger seat, and Lindsay was in the driver's seat, leaning over him. For a moment, I couldn't process what I was seeing. It felt like my world had just shattered all over again, but worse this time. This wasn't some online fantasy or streaming. This was real, flesh and blood, right in front of me. My wife was cheating on me in our car, in broad daylight. I couldn't stop myself. I jumped out of my truck and stormed across the parking lot, my footsteps heavy, every muscle in my body tensing with fury. As I got closer, I could see them more clearly through the windshield. She was kissing him. His hand was wrapped around her waist, pulling her close. I pounded on the window so hard I thought I might break it. "What the hell is this?" Lindsay jerked away from the guy, her eyes wide with shock as she fumbled to roll down the window. The guy, some young-looking, cocky bastard I didn't recognize, just stared at me like a deer caught in headlights. "Mike, she stammered, her voice shaking, but I cut her off. "Get out of the damn car!" I yelled, my chest heaving with anger. Lindsay scrambled out, her face pale, her hands trembling as she tried to close the door behind her. The guy stayed put, his hands raised like he was surrendering, but I didn't care about him. All I could see was her, the woman I had loved, the mother of my child, standing there, completely exposed. "What the hell are you doing?" I demanded, my voice breaking with emotion. "Is this what it's come to now? First the streaming, now you're screwing around in our car with this guy?" Lindsay looked like she was about to cry, but I didn't care. She opened her mouth to say something, but I didn't let her. "Answer me!" I shouted, my voice louder than I'd ever heard it. "What kind of person are you? What kind of mother are you? Emma's inside that school right now, and this is what you're doing?" She flinched at Emma's name, her lip trembling. "I'm sorry," she whispered. I didn't mean for it to happen." "Didn't mean for what to happen, Lindsay? You didn't mean to end up in our car, making out with some guy while your daughter's in school? How does that happen by accident?" The guy finally stepped out of the car, holding up his hands like he was trying to defuse the situation. "Hey, man, I didn't know she was—" "Shut the hell up!" I snapped, taking a step toward him. "This is between me and my wife." He backed off immediately, but I wasn't done. I turned back to Lindsay, my chest burning with the betrayal, the humiliation. "I thought we were trying to fix this," I said, my voice cracking. "I thought you wanted to make things right for Emma." "I do," she cried, tears streaming down her face now. I'm sorry, Mike. I'm so sorry. I wasn't thinking—" "You weren't thinking?" I let out a bitter laugh, shaking my head. "That's all you ever say. You weren't thinking when you started streaming. You weren't thinking when you lied to me for months, and now this? How many times do I have to hear that before I realize you're never going to change?" She reached for me, but I stepped back, unable to bear the touch of her hand. "Don't," I warned, my voice low. "I can't do this anymore, Lindsay. I can't." For a moment, the parking lot was silent except for the sound of her quiet sobs. The guy stood awkwardly by the car, clearly wanting to be anywhere else but here. And me? I felt numb. Like the last bit of hope I had for us had been ripped out of me and thrown to the ground. "Go pick up Emma," I said finally, my voice cold. "I'm going home to pack my things." "Mike, please, just go," I interrupted, my eyes narrowing. "I'll figure out how we're going to explain this to Emma later, but right now I can't even look at you." She didn't say another word, just turned and walked toward the school, wiping the tears from her face. I stood there for a while, watching her go, feeling the last piece of our marriage crumble away. And just like that, it was over. The lies, the betrayal, It was too much. She'd pushed me too far, and there was no coming back from this. Not for me, not for our marriage, but for Emma. I didn't know how I was going to make this right for her. All I knew was that, from now on, everything would be different. After that day in the parking lot, I knew things could never go back to the way they were. Lindsay had destroyed whatever trust was left between us, and while I kept it together for Emma, the anger and betrayal simmered just beneath the surface. Every time I saw Lindsay, I felt it, like a punch to the gut, a constant reminder of how low she had sunk. She tried to talk to me a few times, to apologize, to explain why she had done what she did. But I didn't want to hear it. I didn't care about her excuses, the streaming, the lies, and now catching her with that guy in our car. There was no coming back from that. I was done being the fool. What she didn't know is that I was planning something of my own. You see, I'm not the type to let someone walk all over me. I spent weeks thinking about what I'd do next. I couldn't just walk away from this without making sure she felt at least some of the pain I did. I knew it wasn't right. Part of me felt guilty even. But I couldn't shake the urge for revenge. It all started with her phone. Lindsay had left it on the kitchen counter one night, and I saw it as an opportunity. She was in the shower, so I had a few minutes to snoop. I'd never done anything like this before, but desperate times call for desperate measures. I knew her password. Of course, she never changed it. That was her first mistake. The second was thinking I wouldn't find anything, but I did. Messages, photos, videos, everything I needed to confirm that what I'd seen in the car wasn't a one-time thing. She had been seeing this guy for weeks, maybe longer, and it wasn't just him. There were others, flirty texts, suggestive photos, sent to men I didn't even know. It made my blood boil. My hands shook as I scrolled through her phone, but instead of confronting her right then and there, I decided to play it smart. I forwarded everything, the texts, the pictures, the videos, to my email. I wasn't going to confront her until I had all the cards in my hand, and I wasn't going to just ruin things for her personally. I was going to make sure her little streaming secret became everyone's problem. The next day, I made a few calls. I contacted a lawyer, laid out what I had, and started the paperwork for divorce. I wanted full custody of Emma. There was no way I was going to let her grow up around Lindsay's chaos. The lawyer agreed that, with the evidence I had, we had a strong case. She wasn't just unfaithful. She was reckless, and I had the proof to back it up. Next, I paid a visit to the one person I knew Lindsay wouldn't want involved, her boss. She worked for a small marketing firm, and while her boss, Andrea, wasn't the friendliest person, she valued professionalism. Lindsay had been bragging about how well things were going at work, but I wondered how Andrea would feel if she knew her star employee was streaming on XXX sites in her spare time. It wasn't hard to find Andrea's email. I drafted a simple message, attached a few choice screenshots from Lindsay's phone, nothing explicit, just enough to suggest she wasn't living up to the company's values, and hit send. I knew it wouldn't take long for Andrea to deal with it. People like her didn't take risks when it came to the company's reputation. But the real revenge, the one that made everything worth it, came when I sent everything I had to Lindsay's family. Her parents had always adored her. She was the golden child who could do no wrong. I sent them a package. It included screenshots from the streaming site, messages from the guy she had been sneaking around with, and a letter explaining everything that had happened. I didn't sign the letter. I didn't need to. Her actions would speak for themselves. Within a week, the fallout began. Lindsay came home one afternoon, pale and shaking after being called into a meeting with Andrea. She'd been suspended indefinitely, pending an investigation into inappropriate behavior. She didn't know how Andrea found out, but I kept my mouth shut, pretending to be as confused as she was. Her parents called the next day, furious and heartbroken. I could hear her sobbing on the phone, trying to explain herself, but they weren't having it. They told her she was a disgrace to the family, that she had humiliated them, and that they couldn't believe what she had done to Emma and me. That night, she confronted me, her face red with anger and tears. "Did you send those pictures to my parents?" she demanded, her voice shaking. I didn't even bother lying. "Yeah, I did," I said coldly, crossing my arms. "And I sent them to your boss, too. I'm done protecting you, Lindsay. You did this to yourself." Her eyes widened, disbelief etched across her face. "How could you? How could you do that to me? How could you do this to us? To Emma? You lied to me, cheated on me, and exposed yourself to half the internet. You think I'm just going to stand by and let you get away with that? I'm not the fool you thought I was." She broke down then, collapsing onto the couch, sobbing uncontrollably. But I didn't feel sorry for her. Not anymore. This was her mess, and she was finally paying the price. Over the next few weeks, everything unraveled for Lindsay. She lost her job, her parents stopped talking to her, and the guy she had been cheating with? He bailed the moment things got messy. She was alone, broken, and humiliated, just like I had been. I should have felt satisfied. I had destroyed her the way she destroyed us. But as I watched her fall apart, part of me felt hollow. Emma was the only reason I kept going. She was innocent in all this, and I couldn't let my anger poison her too. The divorce was finalized quickly, thanks to the overwhelming evidence in my favor. I got full custody of Emma, and Lindsay was allowed supervised visits. But I could tell she didn't want to face me. She never fought back. She didn't have the strength anymore. In the end, I got my revenge. I made sure Lindsay's life was as miserable as the one she left me with. But standing there in my empty house with Emma asleep upstairs, I realized that revenge didn't fix the damage. It didn't make the pain go away. I had won the battle, but I had lost the life I once cherished. And that loss? It's something no amount of revenge could ever repair. Months passed since the divorce, and life slowly settled into a new routine. Emma and I adjusted to life without Lindsay, but the bitterness still lingered. I had won full custody, and while Lindsay tried to keep in touch with Emma, it was clear her life had spiraled. She wasn't the same person anymore. That chapter of my life felt like a distant, ugly dream I was trying to wake up from. But moving on wasn't as easy as I thought it would be. I spent most of my time working and taking care of Emma. I didn't have much of a social life anymore, and dating was the last thing on my mind. Trusting someone again? That seemed impossible after what I'd been through with Lindsay. But life has a funny way of throwing curveballs when you least expect it. It all started when I enrolled Emma in a new daycare. The place was small, run by a woman named Sarah. I didn't think much of her at first. She was just Emma's teacher. But as the weeks went by, Sarah and I started talking more whenever I picked Emma up. She was kind, with a gentle smile and a warmth that made you feel instantly at ease. She was around my age, mid-30s, with dark brown hair that she usually wore up in a messy bun, and bright green eyes that seemed to read right through me. Unlike Lindsay, there was no pretense with Sarah. She didn't put on a show for anyone. She was just real. At first, our conversations were light, mostly about Emma's day or how she was adjusting to everything. But gradually, we started talking more about life, about parenting, and even a little about our pasts. I found out Sarah was a single mom too. She had a son, Aiden, who was around Emma's age. His dad had left when Aiden was just a baby, and Sarah had been raising him on her own ever since. It was clear we had a lot in common, but I wasn't looking for anything serious. I was still too raw from everything with Lindsay. Still, I couldn't help but notice how easy it was to talk to Sarah, how she made me laugh, how she made me feel normal again. One Friday after picking up Emma, Sarah mentioned that she and some of the other parents were planning a small get-together at the park that weekend. It was nothing formal, just a chance for the kids to play while the parents hung out. I hesitated, feeling like maybe I wasn't ready to jump back into any kind of social life, but Emma's excited face made the decision for me. "Hi, Daddy, can we go? Please," Emma begged, bouncing up and down with that infectious energy only a 4-year-old can muster. All right, I chuckled. "We'll go." That Saturday, the weather was perfect. Clear skies and a soft breeze. Emma ran off to play with Aiden and the other kids as soon as we got to the park, leaving me standing awkwardly near the picnic tables. I was about to grab a seat when Sarah waved me over. "Hey, Mike, glad you could make it," she said, smiling as she set out snacks for the kids. "Yeah, thanks for the invite," I replied, trying to hide how nervous I felt. It had been a while since I'd done anything like this. Socializing, being around people, without feeling like a broken mess. We ended up spending most of the afternoon together, talking and laughing as the kids played. It felt nice, normal. Sarah had a way of making me forget about the weight I'd been carrying for so long. I found myself looking forward to her company more than I'd expected. As the day wound down and the sun began to set, Emma ran up to me, her cheeks flushed from running around. Daddy, can we stay a little longer? Please? Actually, I think it's time to get home, kiddo, I said, ruffling her hair. You've got to be exhausted. Emma pouted for a second, then turned to Sarah. Can we play with Aiden again soon? Sarah smiled, glancing at me. Maybe we can plan something for next weekend. I nodded, realizing I didn't mind the idea of spending more time with her. Yeah, I think we can do that. Over the next few weeks, we did just that. We had a couple more playdates with the kids, and each time, Sarah and I grew a little closer. I could feel myself opening up to her in ways I hadn't with anyone since the divorce. She wasn't pushy, and she didn't pry into my past. She just listened, shared her own struggles, and somehow made me feel like I wasn't alone in this mess. But it wasn't until one late afternoon when everything changed. We had just finished another playdate at the park, and the kids were running ahead of us toward the car. As we walked, Sarah turned to me, her expression more serious than usual. I've been meaning to ask, how are you holding up? I mean, really? She said softly. I hesitated, not sure how to answer. It's been hard, I admitted. I thought I'd be over it by now, but sometimes it still hits me, you know? She nodded, understanding in her eyes. Yeah, it's not something you just get over. It takes time. I stopped walking, turning to face her. I don't know if I'll ever trust anyone again. After everything Lindsay did, it's hard to even think about letting someone else in. Sarah stepped closer, her voice gentle. You don't have to rush into anything, Mike. But just so you know, I'm not her. I'm not here to hurt you. Her words hit me like a ton of bricks. She wasn't pushing for more, wasn't trying to replace anything I'd lost. She was just there. And for the first time in a long time, I realized I wanted to let her in. I know, I said quietly, my heart racing. I'm just scared. Sarah smiled softly, reaching out to take my hand. We can take it slow, no pressure. In that moment, standing there in the fading light with Sarah holding my hand, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Maybe, just maybe, there was a chance for something good to come out of all this pain. As we stood there watching Emma and Aiden laugh and play in the distance, I realized that my life wasn't over. It had been broken, shattered even. But piece by piece, I was rebuilding it. And maybe, just maybe, Sarah was going to be part of that new beginning. It had been a few months since things started getting serious with Sarah. We kept it slow, like she promised. But there was no denying the spark between us. Emma adored her, and Aiden and Emma became inseparable. It was almost too good to be true. Like after all the hell I'd been through with Lindsay, life had finally thrown me a lifeline. But if there was one thing I'd learned, it was that peace never lasts forever. One evening, Sarah and I were having dinner at my place. The kids were upstairs watching a movie, their laughter echoing through the house. Sarah was telling me about some new program she was starting at the daycare when my phone buzzed on the counter. I glanced at the screen, my heart sinking when I saw the name. It was Lindsay. I hadn't spoken to her in weeks. Her supervised visits with Emma had become less frequent, and every time I saw her, she seemed more distant, more unhinged. I swiped the phone and sent the call to voicemail, trying to brush it off, but the uneasy feeling in my gut wouldn't go away. You okay? Sarah asked, noticing the change in my expression. Yeah, it's nothing, I said, forcing a smile. Just Lindsay being... Lindsay? Sarah raised an eyebrow but didn't press. If you need to talk about it... I don't, I cut her off, more sharply than I intended. I'm sorry, it's just... She's been unpredictable lately. Sarah nodded, her hand resting on mine. I get it, but you don't have to go through it alone, you know? Her words were comforting, but the buzzing of my phone broke the moment. Another call from Lindsay. I sighed, standing up and grabbing the phone. I should probably see what she wants. I stepped out of the kitchen and answered the call, keeping my voice low. What do you want, Lindsay? Her voice was shaky, almost frantic. Mike, I need to see you. It's important. Now's not a good time, I replied, glancing back toward Sarah. If it's about Emma, we can discuss it during the next visit. No, Mike, listen to me. This isn't about Emma. I'm in trouble, she whispered, her voice barely audible over the sound of her breathing. There's someone after me. A chill ran down my spine. What the hell are you talking about? I don't have time to explain everything, she continued, her words rushed. I got involved with someone dangerous. He's after me, and I think he knows where you live. I felt a jolt of panic. What do you mean he knows where I live? Lindsay, what the hell did you get yourself into? I messed up, okay? She cried. But you need to be careful. He's crazy, Mike. Please, you have to help me. Before I could say anything else, the line went dead. I stood there, frozen for a moment, my heart racing. Lindsay was always dramatic, but this felt different. There was fear in her voice, genuine fear, and that scared the hell out of me. I headed back into the kitchen, trying to keep my voice steady. I need to step out for a bit. Sarah looked up, concern etched across her face. Is everything all right? I don't know, I admitted, grabbing my jacket. Lindsay's in some kind of trouble. I'll be back soon, okay? Keep an eye on Emma. Sarah nodded, but I could see the worry in her eyes. Be careful, Mike. I rushed out the door and drove to the address Lindsay had texted me earlier. It was a rundown motel on the edge of town, the kind of place where you'd expect trouble. My stomach tightened as I parked and approached the room number she had given me. I knocked on the door, my hand shaking slightly. There was no answer at first, but then I heard a soft rustling from inside. The door creaked open, and there she was, Lindsay, looking more disheveled than I had ever seen her. Her eyes were bloodshot, her hair a mess, and she had bruises on her arms. Mike, she whispered, pulling me inside. You shouldn't have come. What the hell's going on, Lindsay? I demanded, my voice low. Who did this to you? She closed the door behind me, locking it. His name's Eric. We met online a few months ago. He seemed nice at first, but then things got out of hand. I found out he was into some serious criminal shit, drugs, weapons. I tried to cut things off with him, but he didn't take it well. I ran a hand through my hair, trying to process everything. And now he's after you? Does he know about Emma? She nodded, her eyes wide with fear. That's why I called you. He's been watching me, Mike. He knows where you live, where Emma goes to school. I'm so sorry, I never meant for this to happen, but suddenly there was a loud bang on the door, followed by a deep voice. Lindsay, open the damn door. Her face went pale. Oh God, he's here. I felt a surge of adrenaline. Stay back, I whispered, stepping in front of her. My mind raced as I looked around the room for something to defend myself with. There was nothing, just a crappy motel chair and a broken lamp. The banging grew louder. Lindsay, I know you're in there with him. Open up, or I'll break this door down. I grabbed the chair, gripping it tightly as I positioned myself near the door. My heart was pounding in my chest, but there was no time to think. I had to protect her, for Emma's sake, if nothing else. With one final crash, the door burst open and a man barged in, tall, muscular, and wild-eyed. He was clearly on something, his movements jerky and erratic. His eyes locked on me, and a twisted smile spread across his face. You must be Mike, he sneered, taking a step forward. I've heard all about you. Before he could make another move, I swung the chair as hard as I could. It connected with his arm, knocking him back, but he barely flinched. Instead, he lunged at me, grabbing me by the shirt and slamming me into the wall. The wind was knocked out of me, and I struggled to push him off. Mike! Lindsay screamed, but she was frozen in fear. I managed to shove him off me just long enough to get a few feet of space. My mind was racing. This guy was stronger than I anticipated. I had to be smarter, quicker. Just then, Eric pulled something from his waistband, a knife. My stomach dropped. You think you can come between me and her? He snarled, waving the blade in front of him. You don't know who you're messing with. I backed up slowly, my eyes on the knife. You need to leave, man. This has nothing to do with me. Oh, it does now, he growled, advancing toward me. Just as he was about to strike, I ducked to the side, grabbing the broken lamp and smashing it over his head. The force sent him stumbling backward, blood trickling down his face, but he didn't go down. He rushed me again, but this time, I was ready. I tackled him to the floor, pinning him down as he thrashed beneath me. Lindsay screamed, Stop! Mike, you're going to kill him! But I didn't care. All I saw was red. This guy had threatened my daughter, threatened my family. I wasn't going to let him walk away. With one final punch, Eric's body went limp. I stood up, breathing heavily. my fists shaking. He was out cold, blood pooling beneath him. I turned to Lindsay, who was huddled in the corner, tears streaming down her face. "We need to call the police," I said, my voice hoarse. She nodded, her whole body trembling. "Mike, I'm sorry." But I wasn't listening anymore. I pulled out my phone, dialing 911 as I stared down at Eric's unconscious body, wondering how the hell we'd gotten here. All I knew was that I'd do anything to protect Emma, even if it meant crossing a line I never thought I'd cross. The police arrived quickly, lights flashing outside the dingy motel as officers swarmed the room. Eric was still unconscious when they cuffed him, blood dripping from the gash on his forehead, where I had hit him with the lamp. It felt surreal, standing there as they read him his rights. Lindsay huddled in the corner, trembling, as they took statements from both of us. An officer approached me, his face serious. "You all right, sir?" I nodded, though my hands still shook. "Yeah, I'm fine. Just protecting my family." "Seems like you did more than that," the officer muttered, glancing at Eric's limp body being dragged out on a stretcher. "Guy's lucky you didn't finish him off." I didn't respond. I couldn't. The adrenaline was still coursing through my veins, and I couldn't shake the image of Eric lunging at me with that knife, or the way I felt as I brought him down. I wasn't proud of it, but deep down, I knew I'd do it again if I had to. Emma came first. Always. After a long couple of hours, they let us go. They told me they'd be in touch about pressing charges, but for now, I was free to leave. Lindsay was silent the entire ride back to my house, her eyes red and swollen from crying. I didn't have the energy to argue with her. I just wanted to make sure Emma was safe. When we pulled into the driveway, I saw Sarah's car parked outside. She must have stayed after putting the kids to bed. I wasn't sure how to explain this to her, how to tell her that my past with Lindsay had just exploded into my present. I opened the front door quietly, trying not to wake Emma, and Sarah was waiting in the living room, her face full of worry. "Mike, what happened?" she asked, standing up. Lindsay shuffled past us, not saying a word, heading upstairs to the guest room without even glancing in Sarah's direction. I sighed, running a hand through my hair. "It's a long story." Sarah looked from me to the stairs where Lindsay had disappeared, and I could see the concern and confusion in her eyes. "Tell me everything," she said softly, walking over and placing a hand on my arm. "I've been worried sick." We sat on the couch, and I told her everything, about Lindsay's call, about the guy, about the fight. I could see Sarah's expression shifting from concern to shock as the story unfolded, and when I finished, she just stared at me, speechless. "I didn't know what else to do," I said, my voice hoarse. "He threatened Emma. I had to protect her." Sarah shook her head slowly, her eyes wide. "You did the right thing, Mike. It's just, I didn't realize things with Lindsay were this dangerous." "I didn't either," I admitted. "She got involved with this guy. Someone dangerous. And now it's spilled over into our lives. I never wanted this, Sarah. I didn't want to bring this chaos into your life." She took a deep breath, her hand still resting on mine. "You didn't bring it here, Mike. Lindsay did. And none of this changes how I feel about you." I looked at her, the weight of everything I'd been carrying suddenly feeling heavier. "How can you say that? I'm a mess. My life's a mess. You and Aiden, you deserve better than getting caught up in my drama." Sarah leaned closer, her green eyes locked on mine. "Mike, you're a good man. You're doing everything you can to protect Emma. And that's what matters. I knew when we started this that things wouldn't be easy, but I'm not going anywhere." Her words hit me harder than I expected, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I let my guard down. I pulled her into my arms, holding her close, the warmth of her body against mine calming the storm that had been raging inside me. "Thank you," I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. "I don't know what I'd do without you." Sarah pulled back slightly, her eyes soft but determined. "You're not alone in this, Mike. Whatever happens, we'll face it together." For a moment, I just held her, feeling a sense of relief wash over me. Sarah had been a constant through all the chaos, a light in the dark, and I realized then just how much I needed her in my life. But just as things were starting to feel right again, a noise from upstairs snapped me out of it. A door creaked open, followed by the soft sound of footsteps. I turned to see Lindsay standing at the top of the stairs, her face pale, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. "I think we need to talk," she said quietly, her voice barely audible. I looked back at Sarah, who nodded, understanding. "I'll give you two a moment," she whispered, squeezing my hand, before standing up and heading toward the kitchen. I walked up the stairs, meeting Lindsay at the top. Her eyes were red from crying, and she looked more fragile than I'd ever seen her. She was a shadow of the woman I used to know, but even now I couldn't help but feel some small flicker of pity for her. "What is it, Lindsay?" I asked, my voice softer than before. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice trembling, "for everything, for dragging you into this mess. I never meant for it to get this far." I leaned against the wall, crossing my arms. "Why did you get involved with him, Lindsay? What were you thinking?" She wiped her eyes, looking down at the floor. "I wasn't thinking. I was lonely, Mike. After you left, I didn't know how to handle being alone. I made bad choices, but I never wanted this to happen." I shook my head, frustration bubbling up inside me again. "You put our daughter in danger. You dragged me back into your mess, and now we're all dealing with the fallout. You didn't just hurt yourself, Lindsay. You hurt Emma. You hurt me." She winced at my words, tears streaming down her face. I know I messed up, but I want to fix it, Mike. I want to be better. For Emma." I let out a long breath, feeling the weight of her words settle over me. Part of me wanted to believe her, wanted to hope that she could change. But the damage had been done, and I wasn't sure I had the strength to give her that chance. "I don't know, Lindsay," I said finally, my voice heavy. "I don't know if you can fix this." She nodded, sniffling. "I'll do whatever it takes. I just want Emma to be safe." I didn't say anything for a moment, just stood there, looking at the woman who had once been my entire world. It was hard to reconcile the person she had become with the woman I'd married all those years ago. "I'll figure out how to keep Emma safe," I said quietly. "But as for us, there's no going back. You know that, right?" Lindsay nodded, her tears falling silently. "Yeah, I know." With that, she turned and walked back into the guest room, closing the door behind her. I stood there for a few moments, letting the silence settle in before heading back downstairs. When I reached the kitchen, Sarah was waiting for me, leaning against the counter. She gave me a small, reassuring smile, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt like maybe, just maybe, things could be okay again. "You all right?" she asked, her voice soft. I nodded, pulling her into my arms. "Yeah, I think I will be." Because with Sarah by my side, I knew I wasn't facing this fight alone anymore. And that made all the difference. A few weeks passed, and things began to settle down after the chaos with Lindsay and Eric. I was trying to find some sense of normalcy again, focusing on work, Emma, and my budding relationship with Sarah. It felt good to have some peace after everything that had happened. But deep down, I knew something was still unresolved, something I had been avoiding for far too long. It had started as a nagging thought in the back of my mind, a whisper that had grown louder since the divorce and all the revelations about Lindsay's betrayals. After everything she'd done, after all the lies and the infidelity, I couldn't shake the question that had crept into my mind. What if Emma isn't mine? I hated myself for even thinking it. Emma was my world, the one thing that kept me grounded through all the chaos. But the doubts had started to eat away at me, especially after finding out about Lindsay's affair with Eric, and God knows who else. What if Lindsay had been lying to me about more than just her cheating? One evening, after putting Emma to bed, I found myself sitting alone at the kitchen table, staring at my laptop. I had been researching DNA test kits for days, and I knew it was time to stop putting it off. I had to know the truth, no matter how much it scared me. Sarah was in the living room reading, and I didn't want to drag her into this. She'd been so supportive, helping me rebuild my life after Lindsay tore it apart. But this was something I needed to face alone. I ordered the test. The next morning, I couldn't even look at Emma the same way. Every little feature of hers that I had always assumed was mine, her smile, her laugh, her eyes, suddenly felt like question marks. Was I seeing myself in her, or was I just seeing what I wanted to see? The kit arrived a few days later. I waited until Emma was asleep before swabbing her cheek, the act itself feeling almost criminal, like I was betraying her by even questioning it. I did my own swab, sealed everything up, and sent it off, my stomach churning with every step. The waiting was the hardest part. Every day felt like an eternity as I tried to act normal around Emma, tried to ignore the doubts gnawing at my heart. Sarah could tell something was bothering me, but I didn't have the courage to tell her what was really going on, not yet. Then, one evening, as I was sitting on the couch with Sarah, my phone buzzed. It was an email from the DNA testing company. "Mike, you okay?" Sarah asked, noticing the way my face had gone pale. I looked at her, my heart pounding in my chest. I think I just got the results." She frowned, confused. "Results for what?" I hesitated, my voice barely a whisper. "I did a DNA test." On Emma, Sarah's eyes widened, but she didn't say anything at first. She just stared at me, waiting for me to explain. "I needed to know," I said, my voice cracking. "After everything with Lindsay, after all the lies, I just couldn't stop wondering if she'd been lying about Emma, too." Sarah reached for my hand, squeezing it tightly. "Mike, whatever those results say, it doesn't change anything. Emma's your daughter." I nodded, though I wasn't sure if I believed that. I had to know the truth. I opened the email, my hands shaking as I scrolled through the results, and then I saw it. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. Not a biological match. I stared at the screen, my heart feeling like it had stopped. Emma wasn't mine. She wasn't my biological daughter. Everything I had believed for the last 4 years, everything I had built my life around, had been a lie. "Mike?" Sarah's voice was soft, concerned. I couldn't answer. I couldn't breathe. The room felt like it was spinning, and all I could see was that one damning sentence on the screen. "Mike, talk to me," Sarah urged, kneeling in front of me, her hands on my knees. "What does it say?" "She's not mine," I whispered, the words barely making it out of my mouth. "Emma, she's not my daughter." Sarah's face fell, her eyes filling with sympathy and shock. "Oh my God, Mike, I'm so sorry." I felt like I had been gutted. Emma was my everything, and now I didn't even know who she really was. I thought back to all the times I had held her, comforted her, loved her. None of it felt real anymore. "What do?" I asked, my voice trembling. "How am I supposed to tell her? To even look at her?" Sarah wrapped her arms around me, holding me close. "You don't tell her, Mike. Not right now. Emma doesn't need to know this. She's still your daughter, no matter what that test says. She loves you and you love her. That's what matters." I knew Sarah was right, but it didn't make the pain any less real. I had built my entire life around being Emma's father, and now I felt like I had been robbed of that identity. How could Lindsay do this to me? How could she lie about something so fundamental? Something that had defined my entire existence for the last 4 years? I stood up abruptly, breaking away from Sarah's embrace. "I need to talk to Lindsay." "Mike, wait!" Sarah called after me, but I was already heading toward the door, grabbing my keys. I drove to Lindsay's apartment, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. I wasn't thinking straight. All I knew was that I needed answers. When I arrived, I banged on her door, anger boiling inside me. Lindsay opened it, her face pale when she saw me. "Mike, what are you doing here?" I shoved the phone in her face, showing her the DNA results. "You lied to me. For 4 years, Lindsay. You let me believe Emma was mine and she's not. How could you do that?" Her face crumbled, tears welling up in her eyes. "Mike, Don't," I snapped. "Don't give me your excuses. I want the truth, for once in your life." Lindsay sobbed, wiping at her face. "I didn't know, Mike. I didn't know for sure. It was one mistake, one night, and I didn't think it would matter. You were so happy when I told you I was pregnant. I didn't want to ruin everything." "So you let me raise a child that wasn't mine," I said, my voice cold. "You let me believe Emma was my daughter. And now what? Now I'm supposed to just, what? Walk away?" She shook her head, panic in her eyes. "No, Mike, please. You're her father. You've always been her father. She doesn't know anyone else. She loves you. Don't take that away from her." I stood there, breathing heavily, my mind racing. Lindsay was right about one thing. I couldn't walk away from Emma. I couldn't just stop being her father because of a stupid DNA test. But the betrayal, the lie, it cut deeper than anything Lindsay had ever done. "I'll never forgive you for this," I said finally. my voice cold and hard. But you're right. I'm not walking away from Emma. She's my daughter, no matter what that test says. But you're out of her life for good. Lindsay's sobs grew louder as I turned and walked away, my mind numb with anger and pain. I drove home in silence, not sure what I was going to do next. But one thing was clear. I was Emma's father, and no DNA test could change that. When I got home, Sarah was waiting for me at the door, her eyes filled with concern. I walked over to her, pulling her into a tight embrace, feeling the weight of everything settle over me. "She's still my daughter," I whispered, my voice breaking. "No matter what." Sarah held me close, her warmth and strength the only thing keeping me grounded. And that's all that matters, Mike. That's all that matters. After discovering that Emma wasn't biologically mine, I was consumed by a mixture of heartbreak and fury. Every time I looked at Emma, I saw the innocence in her eyes, a child who knew nothing of the lies and deceit swirling around her life. I loved her deeply, and nothing would change that. But Lindsay? She had burned any bridge between us the moment she let me live a lie for 4 years. I thought the divorce, the affair, and everything else was the worst she could do to me. But this was unforgivable. It wasn't just about me anymore. It was about Emma's future, her stability, and making sure Lindsay could never hurt her again. I knew it wasn't just about cutting Lindsay out of our lives. I needed to ensure she wouldn't come crawling back into Emma's life when it suited her. I needed to burn it all down. I had every intention of making sure Lindsay regretted every lie, every betrayal, every moment of deceit that had led us here. The first step of my plan was financial. I knew Lindsay had been struggling since the divorce. She'd lost her job after I exposed her streaming on the adult site, and without steady work, she was barely scraping by. But I also knew she had one thing left: the house we had owned together. She was renting it out to help cover her bills, while she lived in a small apartment. I made a few calls, played up my connections, and reached out to some people in real estate who owed me favors. Within a month, I had found a way to pull the property out from under her. Lindsay received a letter in the mail one afternoon, stating that the rental agreement on the house was being terminated due to legal complications. She called me in a panic, but I ignored her. I knew she'd be forced to move out of her small apartment soon enough. Without the extra income from renting out the house, she wouldn't be able to afford much. I wanted her to feel that desperation, the fear of losing everything she thought she could hold on to. But that was just the beginning. Next, I set my sights on her social circle. Despite everything, Lindsay still had some friends who didn't know the full extent of what she'd done. She had always been good at playing the victim, spinning stories to make herself look like the wronged party. I wasn't about to let that continue. I compiled everything I had: screenshots of her streaming profile, texts from the men she'd been involved with, and even the DNA test proving that Emma wasn't mine. Then I sent it all to her family, her friends, her former coworkers, everyone. It didn't take long for the fallout to begin. One by one, her friends started distancing themselves from her. Her parents, who had always thought Lindsay could do no wrong, were horrified. They called me, begging for an explanation, but I directed them to the evidence. It was all there. Lindsay had built a life on lies, and now that foundation was crumbling beneath her. She tried to do damage control, of course, but the truth was out, and no amount of excuses or apologies could put the pieces back together. The respect and sympathy she had once commanded from her circle were gone. No one wanted to associate with her, and the judgment from her own parents was the final nail in the coffin. Then, there was the legal aspect. I had already secured full custody of Emma in the divorce, but I wanted more. I wanted to ensure Lindsay could never interfere with Emma's life again. I contacted my lawyer and started the process of having her parental rights terminated. It wasn't easy. It never is. But with the DNA results, the proof of her dangerous connections with people like Eric, and the documented lies and betrayals, I built a rock-solid case. Lindsay fought back at first, claiming she loved Emma, that she wanted to be part of her life. But her pleas fell on deaf ears. The judge saw through her facade. By the end of the hearings, it was clear that Lindsay was not fit to be a mother. Her rights were revoked, and Emma was officially mine legally, if not biologically. The look on Lindsay's face when the judge made the final ruling was one I would never forget. She was shattered, completely and utterly defeated. She knew there was no coming back from this. The last part of my plan was the most personal. I waited until Lindsay was at her lowest, until she had lost everything: her home, her friends, her family, her child. Then, I made one final move. I visited her. It wasn't easy finding her, but I eventually tracked her down to a rundown motel on the outskirts of town. She had nowhere else to go, living out of a single suitcase. When I knocked on the door, she opened it, her eyes bloodshot, her face hollow. "Mike, what are you doing here?" she whispered, her voice weak. I didn't step inside. I didn't want to. I just stood there, staring at the woman who had once been my wife, the woman who had turned my life upside down. "I wanted you to know something," I said, my voice cold. "It's over, Lindsay. Everything. You have nothing left. Not the house, not Emma, not even your parents. And you only have yourself to blame." Tears welled up in her eyes, but I felt nothing, no pity, no sympathy. "Mike, please, I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I was scared. I didn't know what to do." "You always had a choice," I said, my voice hard. "And every time, you chose to lie, to betray me, to ruin our family. Now, you're going to live with those choices." She sobbed, falling to her knees, but I didn't move. I watched as the weight of everything finally crushed her, watched as the reality of her actions sank in. I had no doubt she was sorry, but it was too late for that. Far too late. "Goodbye, Lindsay," I said, turning away. As I walked back to my car, I felt a strange sense of closure. It wasn't joy exactly, but it was something close to peace. Lindsay had taken so much from me, but I had reclaimed my life. Emma was safe. I had a future with Sarah. And Lindsay? Lindsay was left with the ruins of the life she had destroyed. In the end, I realized that revenge wasn't about making her suffer. It was about making sure she could never hurt us again. And I had done that. I had won.